коллеги, все те,
All
кто...
right. Welcome, everybody. All those who joined our discussion. My name is Daria Labanova. I'm Deputy Managing Director of the Gorchakov Foundation. We are really grateful to all of our experts who joined us today. For many of you, this is the first time working with our foundation, and we are happy to have such a big audience of international experts joining us today. We often have discussions on various international affairs at our foundation. Today, we'll talk about digital platforms. As you know, it is a kind of space for international relations, and there are a number of key factors contributing to this. We know that digital technology plays a key role in all aspects of our life today. Digital platforms are what makes a country more competitive. Today, it affects the position of your nation in the world. And it is important for a country to have its own digital platforms. This is one of the topics that I would like us to discuss today, whether it's a must for a country to have its own digital platform. So basically, there are a number of companies that produce their digital platforms, and certain countries who do not have these platforms of their own have to join some other countries. So countries form these kind of blocks. So each country has a choice to make. And there we see kind of competition, a kind of rivalry between platforms, between countries, and this certainly shapes your country's foreign policy. Like I said, today we have some very good experts from China, India, Arab Emirates. Our moderator today is Oleg Shakirov, our expert at the Strategic Studies Center. We'll use two languages, English and Russian, for our discussion. And first, we will let our speakers give their presentations. And after that, we'll definitely have some time for questions and answers. Oleg? Thank you, Daria. Thank you, the Gorchakov Foundation, for organizing this event. Today, we'll talk about digital platforms and the role they play in international affairs. We have been talking about this new era of digital technology that affects every aspect of our life and even every aspect of international relations. Yet this subject is always new because we always see some new trends, new developments affecting various processes happening around the world. So it's always very important to discuss this subject. And we have some very wonderful speakers joining us today. Let me introduce them briefly. We have Ivan Danilin representing Russia. He will give us Moscow's vision. He is head of Science and Innovation Department at the IMEMO Institute. We are also joined by Sami Ramsey, researcher at the Emirates Policy Center. China is represented by Miao Jianmin, research associate at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. And then India is represented by Arvind Gupta, co-founder of the Digital India Foundation. Mr. Gupta told us in advance that he has to leave early. So I would like to let Mr. Gupta go first. And these are the questions that the organizers would like us to discuss today. What kind of conditions should country create to develop their own digital platforms? How digital platforms can contribute to international cooperation? And whether in using another country's digital platform could affect your position, your foreign policy. And I would like to add a couple more questions. What are the key elements of digital platforms, and how can we cooperate using these digital platforms? All right. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Arvind Gupta. We have 15 minutes per speaker, 15 minutes for each of the speakers. And then I think after Mr. Gupta gives his presentation, we'll ask questions to Mr. Gupta, then we'll let him go and we'll continue with the rest of the speakers. Okay, Mr. Gupta, please, the floor is yours.
Господин Арвинд Гупта, предлагаю...
Mr. Gupta, go ahead, please. The floor is yours. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you. Just give me a moment. I'm just sharing my presentation and just confirm that you can all see my presentation, please. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
If yes, I am proceeding, assuming that you can all see the presentation. So thank you for having me. I, of course, work in the area of digital platforms, digital economy, and I teach and do research in this area. So this is a very pertinent subject. And I think I'm going to touch upon where and how, why we have come to this discussion the way we are doing it today. As you all know that the fourth industrial revolution, which is taking place right now, really encompasses three big things: data, connectivity, and computing power. Computing power includes algorithms. Connectivity brings about a lot more data, and as more and more people get connected to the internet, which is now breached almost the 5 billion mark. We have, every country, every citizenry, every society is producing a lot more data, that can then be used by the massive computers and the algorithms being programmed to really decide how we consume, how we see certain things, how we buy, how we think. And I think that is the biggest danger of our times. And what we are seeing also is, on one hand, the world is the internet, the Web 1.0 was meant to democratize the internet and really make it open and available to everybody, which it is doing. But on the other hand, a few powerful platforms and corporations are controlling really what we do on the internet. And when we talk about digital platforms, I think there are two very distinct platforms that are coming, or two distinct origins of platforms. One is we have platforms coming from the Silicon Valley of the US, from Seattle down to the San Francisco, San Jose area, which is Microsoft, Amazon, the Facebooks, the Metas, the Googles, or the Alphabets, the new name that Google has. And if you combine all of them, and their market cap is, of course, $7-8 trillion. It was probably $10 trillion if it was not corrected in the recent few months. And then the second model, and we have a representative from China today, so would love to hear his views on this, is that the BB80 platforms, which are coming from the Shenzhen Valley of China, which is the Baidu, ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent. All of these platforms, if you see the ones from the US, the ones from China, all have billion-plus users. They're extremely pervasive, and people are using it without understanding that they are really building their products based on data that we are sharing with them, knowingly and unknowingly. And they are a lot driven by a few of them are driven by transactions, but 95% of them are driven by advertising revenue, which is data driven. Which is, so the principle that they have is, the product is free, then you are the product. And they commoditize the human beings and how we think, how we behave, as I said, and how we buy things. And that is the core principle on which they are working their advertising driven model. So that is the extent of the private digital platforms. And this big tech companies, what do they do today? They probably, all of them have a monopoly. And this monopoly in their own domains is what is causing a lot of these issues that we are talking about. If you see, monopolies start from the operating system. There are probably only three companies which have control over operating system: Apple, Microsoft, and Android, which is Google. Payments. Payments we have seen globally. There are certain players from China, Union Pay. There is a UPI in India, and a few others. But dominantly, there are two players: Visa and Monopoly, Visa and Mastercard. E-commerce. We have JD, Alibaba, the Walmarts of the world, and Amazon. Really, they control the top 50-60% of e-commerce transactions globally. Social media, Facebook probably controls everything. They control, the Instagram, the Facebook by itself, and then WhatsApp, which is again one of the most dominant messengers in the world. And if you see from the Tencent side, you have the WeChat, again, which is and Weibo, which are again very. You see, the point I'm trying to make, folks, is that we have a few monopolies, duopolies at best, which are controlling exactly what we do on the internet. And the last point I want to make is that all this is leading to data-driven global advertising. We've done our analysis. 95% of global revenue is actually probably flowing through only two platforms: Google or Alphabet and Facebook or Meta. And this is the extent of monopoly or duopoly that we have. What this is also doing is, because of lack of global standards, there is lack of accountability for any misinformation and fake news. And I'll present some cases on this, that there is the immense amount of fake news that we are seeing today on these platforms, or misinformation, which is organized fake news, is very, very high. We've seen in the recent acquisition of Twitter by Elon Musk that the content neutrality principle, technology needs to be neutral. Technology needs to be obeying the laws of countries it operates in, not the other way around. Technology should not be imposing their laws on the citizens of a country who have their own governance system, own democratic norms, own laws. But it's the other way around. It seems like technology always keeps violating this content neutrality principle. The thinking, the ideology of the owners is percolating down to the platform and its algorithms. And last but not the least, monopolies are killing innovation. They acquire innovative products which could be future challenges to them before they even are becoming big. So this is the kind of dominance we are seeing all these platforms have in our world. Today, if you have to describe what is Amazon or what is Alphabet / Google, you will have a tough time. Amazon probably does from e-commerce, that's the most known, but streaming video, music, payments, devices, delivery, and advertisement, you name it, and they are in that business today. So news, they're getting into news. And so there is that these platforms are becoming so big on the basis of the consumers they acquire in one domain, and they're expanding their verticals, and I think they're killing monopolies they're killing innovation in the process. So what do we have? I already talked about this. See, 90% of all operating systems are Windows or Android. Mastercard, Visa, JD, 38% is Alibaba, JD, 13%, so 50% is owned by the three top players. 3.6 billion people use social media, and 95% of the global revenue is controlled by big tech companies. But that would have been okay if the technology was serving the society in general and was not taking partake in geopolitics or national politics or even ideological battles. What they're doing is they're becoming more and more tools for spreading fake news across the political divide. The platform Twitter banned its own president in its country, and they talk about free speech. So there is this whole algorithmic recommendations are creating more confirmation biases and more echo chambers. So people are listening to what they want to listen just because, I mean, that's the way these algorithms are working. and and all these platforms are manipulated by bots, and these bots are really spreading a lot of misinformation. India, for example, has been during the last 2 years, and even during the Ukraine Russia crisis, has been impacted very heavily by bots in terms of digital influence operations coming from our Western neighbors. So we have been on the vigil, and we have banned hundreds of YouTube accounts, hundreds of Instagram accounts, which were caught spreading fake news. So that's and it is now left upon governments and countries to contain that fake news or misinformation. The platform by themselves are really not putting mechanisms in place to curtail that, and that is what is a danger. Apart from this, even though it's not platform related, we also see a huge risk that only a few critical supply chains few critical countries and origins control all the supply chains of semiconductors. So the weaponization of information is happening, the weaponization of payments is happening, the weaponization of content is happening. But now I think there is another danger that we're seeing is the weaponization of critical equipment, which controls our networks, our telecom equipment, and overall our devices. So those are some of the challenges in at a very high level brief. But I would be failing in my duty if I don't talk about what are some of the possible solutions to this. Especially what we have seen, and this is something that we have been a proponent of. What can democracies do? What can countries do coming together? And one of the questions, Oleg, you mentioned was, can countries trust each other's technology? And that's a big challenge. So the answer, in my opinion, lies in having digital public goods, open goods. And then every country adopts to it. And India has laid the foundation for this. India has shown the way that you can create public goods at population scale. And let me give you an example. In India, we created something called the India Stack. It's a digital public good. A digital public good is not owned by one person. It's not owned by the government. It's not owned by a private sector. It's not a publicly listed firm. If it was a publicly listed firm, it would be $100 billion worth, maybe even more. What does this digital public good do? Identity, a biometrically verifiable digital identity given to every citizen of India. eKYC layer. eKYC stands for electronic know your customer. So you know who you are. So for banking, for opening accounts, this is an open system available to everyone. Payments is not controlled by a private company in India. Payments is a public good in India. It's called UPI, Unified Payments Interface. Any bank to any bank can connect with each other and make any payment without any cost. And this is the beauty of it, that we are doing about 6 billion transactions a month in payments. And again, so we have broken the duopoly of Visa and MasterCard. We are not dependent on Visa and MasterCard. They operate in India, but we are not dependent on it. And then, of course, how do you share data? The consent layer is very important. The data empowerment and protection architecture. There is a technological system available for people to be able to share data with a purpose in an encrypted manner, but it cannot be shared in an omnibus manner. Means it won't, if I share it for a particular reason, it can only be used for that particular reason or purpose. Now, this is called India Stack, and it's an open good. It's available for everybody to use. So this is a model that I think we need to think about. It's a model that in India it's been implemented at 1.4 billion people, and it's low cost, very scalable, and very sustainable. What does it do overall? Apart from creating open public platforms, digital public goods, some of the other recommendations that we have is that we need to have open protocols and algorithmic transparency. That is the regulation and policy part. Harmonization of policies across countries. The data governance framework, as I just explained, what is called the data empowerment and protection architecture, should be available to many countries. Many countries should make that as a standard. And I think all of us need to think about investment in strategic industries like digital public goods, local manufacturing of strategic components. Without that, there will be a lot of dependence and always this fear of what can be done and what cannot be done by technology originating from other countries. So to address those fears, I think we need to all work together, come out with global harmonization, if not standards, of policies and regulation. And the Web 3.0 worlds opens a lot of new platforms for us to fix the problems that we had in the Web 2.0, which was we created the original sin of an advertising-led internet, a data-driven advertising-led internet. I think it's time to fix it and make technology neutral, technology not subservient to its owners, but technology really responsible to its citizens. Thank you. And I kept within 15 minutes.
Это просто потрясающе. Благодарю вас за
Absolutely great. Thank you very much for a great presentation. You were quite perfect at identifying the diagnosis of the current situation and the outlined major proposals. If I may, I'm going to ask a question pursuant to your presentation. The idea which you presented as a possible solution of digital public goods, that looks very interesting solution. But how you described it, this is the solution of a national perspective. This is the solution for India. So this is opportunities in some key sectors to get rid of the dominant role of these big platforms, which you mentioned in the very beginning of your presentation, and to move a different way. But how do you believe? Is it possible to use this model at scale? Can it be applicable on the international level? Can India use it as a tool to interact with neighboring and other countries?
So I can respond very briefly. It has already been offered. For example, our digital public goods for vaccination, a platform called COVID, has been given to 27 other countries. And every country has their own data center, own systems, own languages, own control on it. Nobody controls it. India doesn't control it. This is a digital public good. It's a good. We give it to others. It's like an open patent. We give the technology and software to others and other people implement. Many other countries have already implemented parts of this. Identity systems have been implemented in Northern Africa. Payment systems have been implemented in a lot of neighboring countries like Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Singapore, UAE. So Nepal is now doing it. So it's something that India has offered to the world. And our Prime Minister has clearly said, once you solve for India, which is a 1.4 billion people, you can solve for the world.
Спасибо, это хороший ответ.
Thank you, very good answer to my question. Thank you very much for the clarification. I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker, Ivan Danilin. Ivan, the same questions I outlined at the very beginning, but we cannot, amid the current situation, for several years in Russia, we have been talking about Russian potential center for an alternative technological platform. But if you may touch upon how the current situation changes or makes it more relevant or make it more complicated. So over to you. Alex, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in your session. I'm going to speak Russian, right? We have simultaneous interpretation. That's perfect. It's a great pleasure to present my ideas after Mr. Gupta, who has touched upon the major relevant issues. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the whole Russia, but I'm going to elaborate on my expert's opinion. Before 2018, the question on the technological platforms could be just about economic problems, such as monopolization and the by some countries, and the ratio of the potential big economic potentials, which could be seen in neo-Marxism research connected with the digital colonialism and the transfer of raw data from emerging countries to developed countries. excluding India and China, but when there was a tension between the US and China in technological war, and in the context of the latest post-February circumstances, this question is not only of economic nature, which on the one hand is quite predictable, on the other hand is quite sad. Of course, there are some concerns, and there are some doubts about the immunology of some services to state control, to the state interest, proliferation of third countries of these big digital platforms owners. I'm not going to go into detail this conspiracy or real theories. There are some relevant authorities responsible for that. But we need to focus on the question how it impacts the global agenda, the global arena. This securitization of Stockholm School proponents looked into the challenges connected with the comprehension and perception of digital technologies, the content, including as a kind of a threat. To understand what is happening in digital world, what is really happening is more complicated. If we follow nuclear bomb or the launch of missile rocket is not that difficult, but what is happening in the digital world, the problem of attributes is a big challenge, actually. To put it differently, the joke, if you don't want to find a black cat in a black room. In this respect, the situation which can be seen around the key digital platforms is, on the one hand, facilitates further tension, global tension. On the other hand, as Mr. Gupta has said, there is a big question about the digital sovereignty of different states and different countries, which doesn't add up to the positive agenda on the global arena, even though that nothing criminal or nothing military in the digital sovereignty cannot be seen. We see that the US is making a huge effort to create that or recreate the semiconductor industry. We see the effort on the part of Europe to develop regulation over the digital sovereignty. Chinese, Indian, and Russian, and many other authorities are connected with the effort to solve this question. And the key point in this respect is how this is going to even aggravate the current situation, or maybe it may lead us to the point of a kind of a compromise. The major problem is the abstract state interest, the political proliferation in those digital markets, and I'm going to refer to Mr. Gupta's presentation, is a prevention of the negative effect of digital monopolization. As on the one hand, to have your own national technological digital platforms is very significant and is very relevant under the current circumstances. On the other hand, to turn the global digital industry into the battlefield of big digital platforms shouldn't be the case, considering the public good concept and from the perspective of the competitiveness and other socio-economic political issues. So the question is about whether we will go through these risks path and threats path connected with this ideology of the digital sovereignty is to be tackled in the years to come. Right now, everybody is thinking about the idea of creating these independent feudal digital entities rather than finding this consensus and compromise. So the development of this public good, the economic digital sovereignty faces challenges. Here, I'd like to get down to the questions asked by you, Oleg. The problem is that the successful digital platforms, digital services of national nature consist of different elements. Probably the most beautiful, but not the most important from the long-term perspective, are the technologies. In China, India, and Russia are at the forefront, as our school of IT has a great power. Even if you look at Russia and Russian services such as ecosystems of Yandex, Sber, Mail.ru are not laggards, but sometimes outperform the Western and the American rivals. But it is more complicated with the market, as the market itself is a big factor of the development of the digital economy. What can be seen in Europe, which don't have global digital companies as Google or Alibaba, through the regulation of the access to the European data market and through regulating digital monopolies, are quite successful at their own logic of their digital sovereignty, which has a big chance for globalization, as the digital environment is the following, and sometimes digital economy works one rules, different region by different rules. So the standards which like DPR in the European Union and other EU efforts can become global in the future. And so there is a particular gap. India, with its big population, like China, and quite active economic life, has a good chance to create and improve their digital platforms. Russia, under current circumstances, the situation is more complicated. Even before the crisis, and purchasing power parity account for 3% of the global economy. Considering the demographic issues in Russia, 140 million is 10 times less than the Chinese population. Of course, considering the Russian-speaking countries and investment expansion of the Russian digital companies in other countries, which is going to be diminished right now under the current circumstances. So partially this problem was solved, but from the terms of long-term horizon, we should be very pragmatic, we should be realistic. So probably we won't be able to nourish some big companies in the future. So to create your own digital sovereignty, Russia will have to tackle this issue over the national borders, probably within the cooperation with India, which has great opportunities for growth, and there is no desire to give up our cooperation.
The third point, and you're totally right about this, online platforms. Online platforms are huge, include huge data centers and other assets that use very material chips. Since both Russia and India import such systems, actually, just like many other even developed countries, there are some questions related to that, including the growth of securitization and the weaponization of microelectronics. We will need some additional solutions since we don't want to turn microelectronics into a new battlefield. And at the same time, we should remain somewhat independent, maintain a certain level of sovereignty. And we know from, for example, China's experience that they are able, on the one hand, to manufacture their smartphones and at the same time maintain a certain level of international cooperation. And actually, this helped China develop its microelectronics industry at a very fast pace, beating many Western countries, because China is a large market, and there were several factors at play there, and China achieved huge success with that. Okay, so moving on to your last question from the questionnaire you sent to participants. There is one thing that is both a huge problem and at the same time a ray of hope, and that's diversification and geographic distribution of digital manufacturing, digital production around the world. Currently, according to UNCTAD, the core of the digital economy is 8 to 12 countries, those who manufacture components, those who manufacture chips, etc., etc. With IT services, geography is a little bit more broad and in some cases more narrow. But basically, there are 2 countries and a half that control basically all the platforms. This is the United States and China, even though Russia, the UK, they have their own platforms that can have some influence at a regional level. But geography is actually quite diverse. I can give you a very exotic example. The IT cluster in Belarus, which played a key role and was highly influential. Of course, it's not as big as Silicon Valley or what they have in China, but like I said, geography in IT services is pretty diverse. So I don't think we will see it being divided into feudal blocks, feudal alliances. So after the current period of creating each country its own independent, sovereign jurisdiction, its own Silicon Valley, after this hysteria passes, I think more or less all the countries will come together and we'll see something like what I would call a new digital Geneva, where countries come together and work out some common principles. And this is what Mr. Gupta talked about, by the way, some basic values, some universal principles that take into account the interests of all the nations coming together. And I think this will actually help us decrease certain international tensions. Because, can you imagine a situation where 2 countries have their differences, but at the same time, they have to work together in cyberspace, talk about e-commerce, cybersecurity, etc., etc. Of course, what we need to do now is not to try to leap towards this digital Geneva. What we should do instead is invest in human capital, invest in technology, and invest in developing these value-based foundations that will provide a stepping stone and a foundation stone for this future consensus, future agreement, future Geneva. So the situation actually remains pretty much what it was before 2018. Now, we still have to develop the knowledge-based economy, the economy that makes man its cornerstone. And this is what everybody, Europe, China, India, this is what everybody keeps talking about. We should also develop our national manufacturing capabilities to ensure our digital sovereignty. But of course, we should not aspire to recreate the entire system within one country. This would be counterproductive. And actually, this will create major risks for countries that do that. This will put them backward. But basically, we need to find a common trajectory based. We should formulate common values, common principles that mankind should use for digital platforms of the future. And we all know that governments are not the best aggregators of such opinions. Thank you. This is all from me. Thank you very much, Ivan. Your presentation was less, it doesn't sound as nice for someone who wants to build something from scratch. But I think what you say sounds more realistic, and it's good. Since Mr. Gupta has to leave soon, how about we ask our questions to Mr. Gupta right now? And let's start some. Actually, Ivan, you started this kind of discussion. Mr. Gupta, do you have any questions for Ivan, for example, based on what he said?
Yes, Oleg. If I can ask one simple question, if not now, when will countries like Russia realize that they need to build their own payment systems, own technologies to replace? I mean, the replacement strategy has to be made now, and if not now, when? I think that's kind of a thought. Not he can comment on it. I know he spoke about it, but small comment. I think the time is now. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you for your question.
Иван может отреагировать.
Да. Thank you for your question, Mr. Gupta. So, if I correctly grasp your question, the issue is not whether to do it now or later. The issue is what we should do and on the what value and economic basis. I mean, so there is much experts and say companies that are very keen to use the import substitution and localization logic, not in favor of the public interest or technological, long-term technological innovation development of any country, but for personal benefit. So this is a very specific, as you may know, situation in any import substitution policy. So this is so-called in Russian and in some English-speaking literature, rent-seeking behavior. So when we are speaking about creating our own sovereign or independent or whatever digital platform and technologies, we should orient ourselves not on building sovereignty per se, but on achieving some very precise and rational economic, social, and political benefits. And this is one of the greatest challenge for any country and for any government, because there is so much interest groups that are trying to affect this, that just simply giving up the policy to them will mean not more sovereignty, but less efficiency and more risks for the future. That was the point.
Спасибо. Я, в свою очередь, хотел бы тоже...
Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to go back to one point. Ivan, you talked about the role of the EU, and you mentioned GDPR. So your idea of the European Union, that its regulatory influence is disproportionate, it's too great. So the EU can take it upon itself to formulate these values, this platform, instead of working on technology. Maybe I'm oversimplifying things, I don't know. But anyway, what do you think about this kind of division of labor? I mean, there will be certain countries that will take care of regulation. Of course, we understand that regulation has to be universal. We cannot just assign one country to take care of all the regulatory issues. Otherwise, they will dictate their will to other countries, right? But don't you think that we may end up with a situation where we will see this kind of geographic distribution? There will be certain parts of the world taking care of regulation. Yes, actually, I think this is very likely. You see that the job market is actually very fluid. I don't know. Do you have a lot of friends among IT guys? If you do, you know that this is a special category of people. Even when you talk to IT specialists, it's hard to understand what they're trying to say because they use their own kind of language. And this is an international community. And there are no borders between IT guys in Canada, China, Russia. When IT guys from different countries talk to each other, there are no borders for them. They're just one big global community. And actually, this is a bit of a problem. So, if we want our IT sector to prosper, it's a big question. Russia, for example, offers subsidized mortgage to its IT experts, but this is clearly not enough. We need to think deeper. And it's a question for the future, how to develop digital platforms. I'm not saying that our IT guys are not patriotic. I'm just trying to be objective here, to be realistic. Okay, on the first part of your question, the situation is a bit more complex than what you said. I want to rephrase the Saudi prince, and I would like to say that there is the digital economy has its own kind of oil that it runs on. The EU is about 1/3 of the global economy, and the amount of data in the EU is immense, and they have a lot of human capital. So as part of the so-called offset deals, usually, they use offset deals when they talk about natural resource exporting countries, but here the deal is a bit different. They offer you access to their data market, and in exchange, they insist that you accept some of their demands: digital sovereignty, digital rights, etc., etc. This is already happening. For example, Amazon had to move some of their data centers from the US to Europe because Germans don't want their data to be stored in the US. They want their data to be stored in a jurisdiction where GDPR works. So we actually see this process happening. The problem, though, is on the one hand, Europe compensates for the lack of their own platforms, and they introduce this regulation, and this creates opportunities for developing their own digital businesses. I'm not saying that we are about to see a European Facebook or Google appear anytime soon. I don't think this is very likely, but in order to meet all the requirements of GDPR and other laws, this will create a huge market where a lot of European businesses, European companies will prosper. So the question of who sets the rules actually largely defines where a lot of activity will happen, where new markets will be created. Of course, there are ethical issues, there are geopolitical issues related to Russia's special operation in Ukraine. But let me just give you an example. Let's say Russia has a great team of IT experts that can offer a brilliant solution to all the digital problems. But clearly, Europe will not welcome them to the European market. The Americans will not let them operate in the US market, and this solution will be left on its own. What they will do instead is they will try to lure these these IT experts, and invite them, ask them to move to Europe or to the US. So, like I said, the governments have to create favorable conditions for IT specialists, making them stay in their countries. This is what Russia will have to think very hard about. India will have to do the same, many other countries. Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. We would like to continue. Our next speaker is our expert from China, Miao Zhenming. The basic question is the same: digital platforms and their role in international affairs, but I would like to specify something. In recent years, this discussion about competition between platforms became very relevant because we see this huge competition, huge rivalry between the US and China that extends to technology as well. So what is your view? How do you see this situation from China? Because we often hear Western experts talking about this. Maybe your vision in China is somewhat different. I don't know. We would like to hear from you. Maybe you can offer some kind of solution that will help us avoid this kind of confrontation, this kind of rivalry. Okay, 15 minutes. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I want to show my PPT, but my computer has some problem. Okay, all right. I just said my PPT is not working. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks thanks to the Alexandria Culture Call for Public Diplomacy Fund, and thanks to the director Oleg Shekarov. And I'm very appreciated that I have this opportunity to attend this meeting. Because my major is not about a digital platform, so today I come here just to learn from other experts. In my first presentation, I will introduce the development and the classification of digital platform in China. And in the second part, I want to answer the question about the relationship between the digital form and the relationship between digital form and the international relation. Okay, the first part, with the new round of the digital revolution and the digital transformation of the whole industry, the rise of the digital economy has become a history flaw. Digital platform supporting the role in the stable development of China digital economy. It includes online shopping digital platform like Taobao and Jingdong, and live service digital platform, and like Wuba, you may never heard it, and some social entertainment digital platforms such as WeChat and TikTok. From 2016 to 2020, the average annual growth rate of Chinese digital economy reached 16.6%. In 2020, Chinese digital economy reached 14 trillion yuan, and which accounting for 40% of our country total GDP. You can see that the digital economy has closely taken a very important role in our country's growth. And according to the document published by the Chinese State Administration for Market Regulation, the China digital platform are divided into 6 types, and I will introduce one by one. The first one is the online shopping digital platform, which connect people and goods. Its main function is providing self-service. The second one is the live service digital platform, which connect people to the service. The third one is the digital platform is a social entertainment digital platform, which connect the people to people. And its main function include the social interaction and entertainment. The fourth one is information digital platform, which connects people and information. And its main function include provide information and news. The fifth one is the financial service digital platform, which connect people and money. Its main function include providing online loan service, financial wealth management. The last one is the computing application digital platform, which connects people and computing capabilities. Its main function include application on the mobile phone and the operating system and the cloud computing, like Huawei Cloud. Okay, and in addition, according to the size of the digital platform, the Chinese government divide the digital platform into 3 categories. The first one is a super digital platform, and the second one is large scale digital platform, and the last one is a small and a medium sized digital platform. It's based on the size of any active user in the digital platform. And I will introduce the first one is a super digital platform, refer to a platform with super skills, super wide range of business types, and super high economic size and super restrictive capabilities. The annual active users of the platform in China is no less than 400 million people. And the core business of the platform, at least 2 types of platform business. If you just have the online shopping business, it's not enough. You must have another, like life service or social entertainment or information and financial service. The super digital platform is not less than 1 trillion yuan in 1 year. And the platform, you must have a strong restriction on merchants' access to the user. It means that the merchants must use your platform to connect the users. This restriction, this ability is, you must be very strong. This is the super digital platform. The second one is the largest scale digital platform, referred to with larger user scales. In China, it means that no less than 15 million people. Your platform business with outstanding performance, the market valuation of the digital platform show no less than 100 million yuan. 100 billion, sorry. The platform has a strong ability to restrict merchants from contact consumer or users. The last one is the small and medium-sized digital platform, which refers to the platform with a certain user scale and a certain business types and a certain economic size. This is generally speaking about the Chinese digital platform. And then I would like to, the next part is talk about the relation between digital platform and national security and international politics. First, I want to say that the digital platform will become the foundation of the state's future economy. All economic fields and industry will be affected by the digital platform or digitalization. The digital platform will become the focus of international conflicts and competition between the great powers and the big companies. The digital platform plays also play very important role in the globalization. That I will answer your question that it's important to emphasize that multinational digital platform will form a kind of power. The power is generated by the dependence of users. Because too dependent on Western countries, we recently see some digital platform companies in Western countries led by the United States withdraw from Russia, and Western technology company cutting ties with Russia with a raft of sanctions. They want to give the pressure to Russia. This is the dependent power formed by the use of digital platform. The United States also clamps down on Chinese digital platform. During Donald Trump administration, Trump signed an executive order that banned the use of telecommunication equipment or apps from Chinese firms damns national security risk, like Huawei, WeChat, TikTok. The Joe Biden administration not only used decoupling strategy to break the supply chain, but also used a small yard, high fence strategy, which aimed to maintain the global digital hegemony of the United States and weaponized the use of technology by the United States. It's create very negative influence in the world. China now is emphasized on the national industry strategy made in China 2025. With this strategy is to build the self-reliance and independence of the technology industry. The strategy competition between China and the United States is intensively day by day. As digital technology penetrates into the economy and society, national competition in the future will increasingly be reflected in the digital platform. And the development of digital technology has brought about another round of global power transformation. The digital space has become an important area for the competition of great powers. The current redistribution of power in the global digital space has just begun. Whether it's possible, like you just mentioned, to achieve cooperation or avoid conflict in the digital space, from my opinion, I express a negative value on this. Conflicts and confrontation are inevitable, and in the future, the international powers in the field of digital platform and cyberspace will have more potential conflicts. Another question is about what conditions the state should create for digital platform companies. In my opinion, the first one is digital platform infrastructure. Like in China, they made a lot of efforts in digital infrastructure development and inject new power for the country to achieve its economic growth target. And the modern infrastructure system will evolve with Chinese high-tech, high-quality development in the long run. I'll give you an example. Now in China, we have 1.4 million 5G base stations have been built and be used. Other infrastructure like smart power grids, cloud computing, and smart roads That's all build and which give Chinese a solid foundation for the digital platform. The second, I think, is very important for state to provide a safe and innovation environment. And the third one, I think the financial support is very important if a country want to build their own digital platform. The next one is the human capital, like the next I'm sorry, the last present speaker just mentioned that the human capital and the code technology is also play a very important role. The state investing in science, technology, and engineering and the mathematics, STEM education is essential to maintain a technological dominance. The last point is that the government need to regulate the company by law. I will give you a Chinese example that last year, Chinese government fines Alibaba for 2.8 billion because he breaking the Chinese law. The law is he breaking the Chinese anti-monopoly law. That's Chinese fine Alibaba $2.8 billion. That's the largest fines in Chinese history. After the anti-monopoly law come out. And okay, this is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Спасибо большое. Я бы хотел
Thank you a
сразу,
lot.
как говорят у нас вдогонку,
As we say, just one question for the road. You know, I'm very interested in the idea of so-called segregation or decoupling, which is discussed in the United States. I don't know whether it is a part of their policy or it is a kind of expectation of some representatives. From your perspective, is decoupling possible? And from the perspective of China, is it more a challenge or is it kind of an inevitable thing to happen considering the current circumstances?
I think the decoupling strategy is already used, and now the Joe Biden administration used the small yard and the how can I say that small yard and the long fence strategy. I think the Chinese government already take a lot of measures to protect our own supply chain, and the competition between the two countries, I think it's inevitable. And from my perspective, our government already knows that they take many measures to build our own the supply chain, like a semiconductor, and to not depend much on the United States this supply chain. And that's it.
Спасибо.
Thank you a lot. And the second question, you've said that from your perspective, the conflict connected with the development of digital platforms can be seen today. In the future, they are inevitable.
Yeah.
Do you have a general idea of how, if we cannot avoid these conflicts, how can we manage these conflicts? How can we reduce the possible impact of these conflicts?
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me see. How to reduce the risk of the competition? I think in Chinese government, they they don't believe that they can, reduce that risk or reduce the degree of the competition. So the President Xi, recently published lots of paper about how to, build our own, the high technology, high technology. How can I say that? They published lots of papers. President Xi Jinping give us a guide that ask all the company, the scientists must focus on, build our own technology or our not rely on America or the Western country. I think that now in China, after the Russia crisis, the Chinese in our country a lot of discussion that we have already learned a lot from this crisis. So we see lots of companies withdraw from Russia, and so today we will build our own the semiconductor, the other the technology. Maybe in the past year we just relied on America or relied on other countries. Now our country, the president said, let's build it by ourselves. Okay.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
То есть здесь я правильно понял,
Thank you. I got you right. So if there are inevitable risks, so the general idea is that you need to be more reliant on your own technology and not to be dependent on other states.
Yes. Yes.
Большое.
Thank you very much.
For your question. Okay.
I'd like to give the floor to our fourth speaker today, Sami Ramsey from the United Arab Emirates. We have already discussed the wide range of issues. If you help us, on the one hand, to adapt to the perspective relevant for your own region, and on the other hand, to elaborate on these questions in the context of the international cooperation, international security, how the development of the digital economy is going to impact the international policy and how it will influence next. So you have 15 minutes for your main presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shakolov, for this great facilitating for this important discussion. Actually, I wanted to mention that I am work with Emirates Policy Center, but I am Egyptian researcher. And I work with Emirates Policy Center and many centers in our regional. So that give me some whole image about the position of digital platforms in the Middle East specifically. I want to thank your foundation for inviting me for join this important discussion. And I hope my speech will be beneficial to everyone as I learn from our colleagues today. Before talking about our topic, also I want to point out that my opinion doesn't necessarily represent any institution I work with, but it necessarily represents myself. Okay, I have already prepared a written paper containing a number of main ideas today. Please let me read from it in order to avoid missing any data or main ideas for me. Okay, let's start. My speech today will mainly focus on answering the 4 questions you have mentioned before and our discussion mentioned before. That will be by mapping the disruption of our ownership of digital platforms around the world. Then I will briefly analyze the impact of this disruption on national economies and international politics. And finally, I will suggest a couple of recommendations which aim to enhance the utilization of digital platforms and overcome their harmful effects. We all know the importance of digital platforms comes from their highly impact on international scene, to the extent that some consider them as a new world actors or new international actors in the international arena. According to the map, there is whose digital platforms in the world today. We can divide the map of ownerships into three main groups of countries. The first one consists of the countries with the largest number of platforms. Unfortunately, this group has the list number of countries, as you all know, all the countries, I mean here, of course, USA and China. Furthermore, they are working, of course, to maintain their leading position in this field. And many of their platforms are used implementing quasi-monopolistic policies our colleagues mentioned, and they seeking to reduce competition opportunities with other platforms. For instance, many search engines have accused Google of implementing monopolistic policies and reducing the opportunity to compete with it in some application like Android. Actually, we have a big list of companies when it comes to monopolistic policies. Accusement, I mean. Okay, while the second group of countries I wanted to refer today is including ones that try to enter the global competition by introducing some digital platforms globally and locally. This group includes countries like Russia, Germany, and India. Forms like Driver, maybe Skype, something like that. We can say that these countries have achieved partial success in this field, but they are still far from competing with United States and China, of course. So because of too many reasons, we will mention it later in this speech. Moreover, we can notice that the countries in both groups are industrial ones, but the second group contains a lot of countries in which is known as a trap of model income technology countries. Because they face great challenges related to the question of how to blend between traditional industrial economy and the gradual transition to the digital global one. Trap has happened day too many industrial countries have faced many obstacles, such as the dominance of the first group countries in the digital platforms, whether by owning a large platform over the world, which lets them have a large number of users, data, financial capacity, and scientific studies. The last group in my suggested map in digital platforms ownership consists of the income countries, which failed in catch up with the industrial revolution, which has prevented them from developing the needed infrastructure to make digital platforms. This country, in fact, suffer also technical problems related to the low quality of the internet and the level of scientific research. I think you have noticed that I have unstable internet connection today. And they also suffer from a lack of financing capacities, as most of them didn't use large digital platforms. Also, some countries like Egypt have made small platforms, but its platforms were short-lived and speedy transferred their ownership to from other countries such as UAE. Simply, we can say that this last group of countries remains completely far from global or even regional competition. Also, it relied on unique initiatives and innovations. This map, this whole map and this whole classification sheds a light on risks that come from the digital gap, what we can call it the digital gap between countries, especially the risks in the political and the economic field. As this gap plays, I think, the main role in transferring economic values and the resources from poor countries to already rich ones. Nowadays, large platforms can easily eliminate the local economy firms, whether they are traditional ones. Additionally, global digital platforms can affect the disruption of the work map and the local economic service in many ways. For example, we have seen in some countries how a number of taxi drivers have organized strikes and protests against the activity of digital transportation application like Uber, as you know. This all leads us to support the analysis which says that we are in the midst of reorganization of our economy, in which that platform owners are similarly developing power that may be even more formidable than was that of the factory owners in the early industrial revolution. In other words, we can say that the problem of digital platforms today is not only about how to get economic value, but also it's about how to extend and distribute its benefits internationally and locally. This difficulty become a dilemma, which related to the question of how to mix between extracting the work of these platforms, while this may in the same time lead to a big loss of foreign investment for poor countries, regardless of the local investors who rely on this platforms for marketing and logistics. It is true, digital platform create many job opportunities, of course, but in return, they affect the distribution of wealth, especially as they transfer local resources, as we mentioned. Moreover, work of this platform must contribute to embedding the chances of success local SMEs, because it tended to monopolize many competitive advantages in a way that makes them have the ability to affect social safety and perhaps political stability. Another big question here is how to face the political and the cultural problems regarding the user data owned by foreign digital platforms, especially political use of it. And we don't have to say any example of it because we all know how they can use it in political use. Okay, therefore, I believe that remapping of the ownership of digital platforms across the world is one of the main interests today in international relations field. The importance of digital platforms pushed many investors to buy ownership stakes in a number of foreign platforms. And we see investors from Gulf Cooperation Council, as example, owned stakes in giant digital platforms such as Uber and Twitter, because they think that is an effective way to overcome its monopoly. I believe this may be a good thing to do, but still the most important thing here is paying attention to the importance of owning the know-how, how to create digital platforms. Since owning ownership stakes is not enough to undermine or influence the policies of these platforms, because they follow their home country's laws, as you and pay tax also for their homelands. All of these matters lead us to find new ways to rationalize the activities of digital platforms. My speculation here is that there is a two-step process we should follow. The first one is simply supporting the local environment with the needed capabilities and programs. Meanwhile, working in the external environment for enhancing the competition opportunities with the dominant access forms. In more detail, the government should develop national strategies which aim to build the needed infra and legislative structure, in addition to increasing the government spending on innovation and scientific research. However, the government could sign cooperation agreements with international platforms in a way that grants some advantages to local companies. For instance, we have in Egypt, our government gave or sign a cooperation deal with marketplace platform that implemented a zero profit initiative in local goods if they are display their goods in that platform. I think that will be a good way to encourage the local firm. However, I still believe that it's so difficult for countries to work alone to overcome the influence of the digital platforms. And that will lead us to the second point, which I mean the collective diplomacy actions. I think these actions may have a better chance to play a major role in enhancing the international competition between digital platforms. Fortunately, there are international experiences that can guide us in this matter. I mean here in particular the experiences of European Union, which was to formalize a unified regulation of data ownership, as Mr. Daniel mentioned. And this regulation maybe become main international reference this topic. In this context, I should mention the collective diplomatic effort, which already has succeeded in pushing the group of G20 countries to work on reforming the global tax system and working on prevent large companies from tax evasion. I think it also would be a good idea if they succeed in it. It also recommended taking a couple of diplomatic action, such as working on making international agreements, maybe like JET, to protect the digital competition and to the data follow and transfer. In addition to the programs currently run by the United Nations organization, perhaps the government should establish new specialized regional organization and forms such as energy organizations or like OPEC, something like that. This suggested forms could also support the regional joint projects, whether in the civic or in commercial fields. In the government field, it will be a good idea if there are a regional association of digital platforms workers. It can be a good tool to guarantee workers' rights. That's all what I have today. At the end of my speech, I would like to say that I believe digital platforms are a promising opportunity to enhance international cooperation, but this opportunity can be a major threat if it's not dealt with its negative effects on national stability. Thank you again, Mr. Shakirov, for facilitating this discussion. And I am waiting for your questions and looking forward to hear it. Thank you again.
Самир, спасибо большое. Извините за
Thank you
путаницу.
very much, Samir. I apologize for this confusion with countries. This was just slight misunderstanding from my part. It's very interesting. You mentioned Egypt as an example. Before that, we talked about great powers, and we think there is this kind of competition, this kind of rivalry between great powers. But when we focus too much on great powers, we tend to overlook smaller countries who still play a very important role in their region. And they have their own platforms. So you gave us a very interesting example about Egypt. You mentioned that Egypt
Yes, yes.
attempted to create its own platforms. Of course, they weren't very sustainable eventually, but still, this is a very good example. I think other countries have similar examples. Could you please tell us, maybe you could talk about the regional dimension, how countries can work within a certain region and use this collective diplomatic effort in order to use digital platforms for international cooperation?
Okay. As I mentioned, we have already an experience related to the nation, European Union. I think that will be a guidelines to any regional to work or to follow it. I think we can make forums or discussions OPEC Plus, any uh, any kind of regional forms and institution. I think what will be a good idea in overcomes digital platforms effects. As example, we have in our region the League of Arab States. They, I think, have many initiatives to work together to enhance the infrastructure of our developing countries. And meanwhile, they are trying to make something like regulation of how to enforce the work of giant digital platforms. And I think that will be successful tool because especially small countries can't face the digital platforms alone because we have a low rate of foreign investment. So if of any country try to establish its own rule which prevents the digital platforms from make profits, maybe that's what in return that the digital platforms will punish the countries, the small countries, by preventing these investments. Also, I think they are actually succeeded in making many job opportunities to people here in our country, especially in small countries, and that will be a risk if we try to prevent their working in our country. Our country.
Спасибо, спасибо еще раз. Уважаемые коллеги, мы выслушали
Thanks
всех.
again. All right, we have heard from all of our speakers, but we still have some time left in order to have a discussion. And we received some questions from the audience. Most of our audience are online with us. And I have a question for Ivan Danilin. So let's start with a question for Ivan. There's a question about Russia. What does Russia do to maintain our digital sovereignty? Are we ready to give up Western systems? And I would like to add my own question. Does it actually make sense to give up Western systems and only rely on our own systems? Well, Russia has been doing a lot. We have projects, attempts to create our own chips, our own microelectronics. There is this project to build the Baikal supercomputer. There are other attempts. However, we haven't been able to achieve much because it's very expensive project. There were a few programs, a few elements that were a bit more successful, but As you know, the Baikal supercomputer was eventually manufactured in Taiwan, and we can no longer work with Taiwan and Korea these days, and we cannot create the entire system just in Russia. As far as IT systems are concerned, I think the Russian IT industry worked quite well without government support. For example, our social networks or our search engines like Yandex and our fintech projects, Sberbank, Alpha Bank, Tinkoff, all these fintech companies were quite successful. We just have a few bottlenecks that we need to work on. So the big question is, like Mr. Gupta said at the beginning, we shouldn't do import substitution for the sake of import substitution, because you always have a lot of business people who would be all too happy to make some money in the process of government subsidized import substitution campaign. So you have to be careful about that. And we should also think about the future, because this crisis will be over sooner or later. Every crisis ends. And what we need to focus on is human capital. And I don't think that Russia does enough to take care of our human capital. I think we need to change our entire education system and our social support system. We need to make Russia an appealing country for IT specialists. At this point, we only have a few places and the government has taken a few steps, but this is clearly not enough. So we can only hope that we can do better in the future. And the last thing from me is we still need international cooperation. Like I said, the digital industry is universal. You cannot build your own internet just within your own country. It's impossible. So I don't want to use the terms friendly countries, hostile countries. It's not that black and white when you talk about technology, but we should explore every opportunity, every avenue, every possibility we have, every chance for partnership. There are always things that you can cooperate on with various countries. For example, we can work together with China on some matters, work together with India on some other matters, work together with the Middle Eastern countries on some other matters, etc., etc.
Спасибо, Иван.
Thank you, Ivan.
Мне кажется, исчерпывающе.
Seems to me that it's a very exhaustive answer. We have the second question from our audience. Samir has mentioned such topic as the relations or interaction between the state and the companies, the idea of creating the association to protect the rights of employees of big companies. But there is a question of more general nature. Is there any possibility of competition between multinational companies and the states, and what is the chance of IT giants to win such a competition? We see that such conflicts appear all the time. If our speakers are ready, I'd like to give the floor to Samir, Ramsey to take the floor, and Miao Zhenin to respond to this question. How do you see the situation?
Okay, actually, when I mentioned the associated of employees in digital platform giant, I don't mean that the companies will make its own associated. I mentioned it as I suggested it as a non-governmental association. Maybe it will be supported from governments, but it actually doesn't to work with the platforms itself on itself. So I think it will be a good idea if we try to do it and the government support it. By the way, I can give you an example also in Egypt. We our our workers, digital platforms like Uber, have their own online groups or own digital groups. They can share with each other their demands from the digital platforms. Maybe we can also look at the UK experiences. They started in enforce some digital platforms to make social insurance on their workers and make with them a permanent contract instead of working as outsourcing workers. I think maybe it will be good tool to face the risk of the digital platforms, especially on the society stability.
Спасибо, я понял, что
Thank you. I got that there was a wrong understanding that it's more about traditional approach rather than the role of the state. But if we get back to the question about the conflicts between the state and IT companies, IT giants, how can you respond to that? What are the prospects? Who is stronger right now? Maybe this balance of power will change in the future.
Yes, I think as you said, but I think there is always compromisation with the governments can reach it with digital platforms, and it will support its popularity in countries. And if we have non-regional associations, it will be more better. It will be better than local ones. So of course, the balance of power is not in interest of small countries, but if they work together and they try collective actions, diplomacy, I think it will be good for them.
Спасибо. Здесь вот
Thank
идея
you.
коллективной дипломатии.
So the idea of the collective diplomacy is getting back to us. Dear colleagues, Ivan, Miao Zhenmin, would you like to respond to this question about the possible conflicts between the states and IT companies and the chance of the IT giants in this competition to get this victory against the state? Miao Zhenmin, over to you, please.
I didn't have anything to say this question, but I want to, I totally agree with the opinion of Ivan. I think that, the Russia and China has a long history of cooperation, and we all faced the competition and the American decoupling strategy, and we think that in the future we can have a lot of cooperation, and we can get a lot of achievement, and we already have a solid foundation, and in the future I think that we will more the cooperation, the scientific and the technological cooperation. That's what I want to say. That's it.
Спасибо, Иван.
Thank you a lot, Ivan. Over to you. If you allow, I'm going to give you to add up to the conspiracy theory. That's what I like, actually. It seems to me that the right question would be not whether multinational companies compete against the state. It's kind of strange. These are two groups of entities. We're talking about whether multinational IT companies can compete against the elites and ruling establishment in the country. That would be a right question to ask. The state, which has its own territory, and the IT companies are different entities, but the establishment is something similar to those IT companies and companies in general. So there is a very interesting moment that the both economic and political powers were moving into the hands of the digital global companies over the last 10 years. And we could see that the moment of having those big multinational giants, which described in the science fiction in 1960s, 1970s, which would concentrate the key resources to manage global economy and maybe they will even have some political power. But the life is more complicated rather than our expectations. It hasn't happened yet, and I believe that is going to happen in the future, or maybe never, since there is one simple reason. So practical, economic, and political elites and establishment are not interested in such a development in so-called digital Soviet Union. Those tragic events which we have seen over the last months and which happened before can be a good leverage for the political elites for such kind of a reversal of the power of these corporations. You know, this fear and threat are very effective tool to facilitate power. So any military conflicts, which we have seen a lot over the recent times, and right now we see one of that in the active stage, what we can see, so these tools are very effectively used to tame this corporate freedom and big economic and political controversies between the states, which we can see on the example of China, Europe, and the US. So far, after so-called round of defeat in 2010s, the political elites and establishment winning right now. In the future, due to the bigger competition and new markets, new business models, maybe the dialogue will shift to a little bit different dimension. Since not being a fan of the idea of everything is going to be absolutely different, so we need to assume that the digital economy will change a lot, both internationally and economically. Thank you, Ivan. Dear colleagues, I believe that we can start summarizing our results. We have had 4 speakers who looked at this big issue from different angles, the role of digital platforms as an international policy environment. It will be honest to say that we haven't been able to find all the answers to all the fears and threats which are happening right now and will be happening in the future, but we see another proof that it is a multi-dimensional, multi-layer situation, and we see the interconnection, interrelation of economic, technological, and geopolitical interests. Probably this situation is going to be even more complicated of multi-layer nature in the future. So we shouldn't feel upset that we don't have ready-to-use prescriptions of how to avoid conflicts or how to provide for sovereignty in this area. Undoubtedly, regardless of the serious trend towards independence, what Ivan has said, the role of distribution, of interconnection is still the case, and it provides for the competition of this digital development. I'd like to thank our speakers a lot. That was Ivan Danilan, the head of innovation of Sami, Ramsey, the researcher at the Emirates Policy Center, and Jamin, research associate in Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University, and Arvind Gupta, the head and co-founder of Digital India Foundation, who presented first and had to leave us before. I'd like to thank the Gorchakov Fund for organizing this event, for giving us a platform to share our ideas, to discuss very important issue. Dear distinguished colleagues, I hope we're going to stay in touch and we'll be able to get back to discussion of these issues in a period of time. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the representative of Gorchakov Fund.
Thanks, Oleg Shekrov. Thank you so much.
Коллеги, я думаю, мы можем попрощаться.
Dear colleagues, I believe we can say goodbye to each other. Bye-bye. All the best. Goodbye. All the best to you.